to send a comment to LBC. Lots of different ways you can ask a question. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player. With me in the studio, Polly Toynbee is to my left, columnist for The Guardian and Vice President of Humanists UK. Neale Hanvey is Westminster leader of the Alba party and MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. Stefanie Bolzen to my right, a UK correspondent for the German newspaper Die Welt. And to my far right, Lord Edward Folkes, who is non-affiliated peer and chair of the print news regulator, the Independent Press Standards Organisation, IPSO, and he was Justice Minister in David Cameron's government. So they're here to answer your calls. So many different subjects you could phone in on about tonight. 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's from Stephen in East Grinstead, who has the question that is on everybody's minds tonight. Stephen, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Good evening. Did Matt Hancock fail in becoming King of the... Sorry, I got this wrong. Did Matt Hancock succeed in becoming Prince Charming before failing to be crowned King of the Jungle?
Right, now I'm going to put this to all of my panellists, and they're all going to tell me, no, I didn't watch a single episode. Polly Toynbee.
Oh, I definitely watched lots of it, absolutely. No, I think he failed badly.
He came third. That was, I don't think anybody would have predicted that.
People didn't want him to go because they wanted to put him through more torment. I don't think that people will forgive him either for all that he'd done before or for abandoning his duty in Parliament and to earn £400,000. I think most people were pretty disgusted by the whole thing. And he wasn't really all that charming. I mean, he managed not to say anything terrible, was the best you could say.
I thought he was quite brave in doing all the trials. It didn't seem to faze him at all.
Well, he was paid an awful lot of money to do it.
Yes, I know.
I think a lot of people would do it for £400,000.
Well, I certainly would. I'd quite happily admit it.
Oh, right. That'll be you next.
I think that you have to be a celebrity, though. I think the interesting debate now is going to turn to where is that £400,000 going to go? Because he has said he would give money to charity, but hasn't said what proportion.
Some, he said some, yes. I'm sure he'll give some. But people often say some, and then you never discover what the sum is.
Neale Hanvey, were you watching?
No, not really my cup of tea. And Matt Hancock didn't make it any more appealing to me, to be honest. I've crossed swords with Matt Hancock in the chamber numerous times, particularly during the pandemic. My background's in health. I've found my engagement with him difficult because it's hard to get a straight answer to very straightforward questions, both in the select committee and in the chamber. However, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, for someone who's in a very well-paid job, such as an MP, to go gallivanting off to the other side of the world for an additional £400,000 is not in the best of tastes, really.
Stefanie, have you been watching?
I admit, just once, and then I read the media coverage. I thought it was kind of an interesting sociological experiment, because you would have expected, after everything that has happened and all the scandals and so many people who had such terrible things happen to them in the pandemic, that he would be voted out straight away, and he wasn't. I found that surprising. Instead, Boy George was voted out pretty early on, I think.
But Boy George came across as a thoroughly nasty piece of work in the whole thing.
Well, I missed that.
Matt Hancock, if you take away all people's preconceptions, I think in the first few days, I think the general public felt that he was being bullied, both by the ITV producers and some of the people in the camp. And British people don't like bullies generally.
Yeah. So I guess people then in the end ended up with the idea that he was a quite nice guy and he wasn't that bad after all, and therefore he was allowed to stay that long. And I guess he happily came back to his...
Is there a German equivalent of this?
I have not been living in Germany for such a long time. I guess, yes, I think we have that, but I cannot imagine a sitting MP going there.
No.
It's absolutely unimaginable.
Edward?
I watched a bit of it. A questionable decision, to put it mildly, to go on the programme. He's a gutsy guy. I disclosed that I played cricket with Matt Hancock, and he made himself very popular in Newmarket by doing the only thing that gets attention in the Newmarket press, which is to getting on a racehorse. I don't think he'd done it before. He rode the horse hard and to a finish, and immediately became popular. I think he won, that's right. Yeah. And he was pretty good with these grubs and things. I didn't hear an awful lot about dyslexia, which I thought was the main focus of
he did mention it a couple of times,
right.
But I suspect that if you were editing that programme, you probably wouldn't put too many mentions of dyslexia on screen, would you? I mean, because...
No, it's probably not riveting television, but on the other hand, that was the reason, or professed reason.
Well, they did do it a couple of times.
Ludicrous, as if it was really going to help dyslexia.
Well, if he donates £200,000 to dyslexia charities, I mean, you could say, well done him for that.
That's what you think he should pay, is it?
No, I think he should pay the whole lot.
Right.
I mean, or if he doesn't pay the whole lot, at least not take his parliamentary salary for the time that he was away. Because I think it's different. Nadine Dorries did this, 9 years ago, I think, and she got a lot of hassle for it, but she was a backbencher. Now, even so, I think there was an argument that she shouldn't have done it either. You can do these things once you leave Parliament, and Anne Widdecombe, I don't think, did any of these sort of programmes before she left Parliament, but felt quite happy to do, Celebrity Fit Club, or as I used to say to a Celebrity Fat Club. She didn't like that.
But Nadine Dorries got promoted, though, having been about, and she then became...
It took quite a long time for her to get promoted, it has to be said. I don't think the two things were actually sort of concurrent. Right, thank you very much for that opening question, Stephen. Let's go to an Alexa question from Donald in Nelson in Lancashire. Donald, hi, what would you like to ask? Oh, no, why am I asking what it's an Alexa question, isn't it? So it shows how out of touch I am. Should Britain be sending aid to China? And there's a helpful note here. It says, 2019, the UK spent £68.4 million on aid to China. Now, Rishi Sunak made this speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet last night, effectively trying to reset relations with China. We've been talking about that in the last hour. And a lot of contrasts were made by callers and indeed experts, Stefanie, to the British attitude towards China compared to the German attitude.
Why did I expect that question?
Well, I'm sure you have prepared.
Yeah, I have prepared a little bit. I actually looked at the trade volume and compared them between Britain and the UK. So Germany's trade volume with China in 2021 was around 250 billion euro.
Is that import and export?
Yeah. Trade. So while the UK's was 92. So there you go already. And Germany is the German economic model is based on exports, and therefore it wasn't really a surprise that our newish Chancellor Olaf Scholz was the first head of government to visit Xi just after the Communist Party Congress. And, of course, as always, brought a big delegation of big CEOs with him and got some contracts back. He brought them back, but he insisted that he also made some political arguments. And actually, to be fair, after this meeting, or from this meeting, emerged that Xi said there shouldn't be any threat with nuclear weapons in Europe. So Germans claim there was a political benefit for everyone.
He seems to be adopting the approach that David Cameron and George Osborne adopted when they were in power, sort of get closer to China and hopefully maybe things can change politically there. That hasn't happened. If anything, it's gone the other way. And there has always been a debate in this country as to the extent to which we should be in hock to Chinese investment in our national infrastructure. Forget sort of commercial businesses. We're talking about national infrastructure here. Is that debate going on? I know you don't live in Germany.
No.
Is that debate going on?
Yeah, it's actually very, very much going on. So there was, 4 weeks ago, there was a big row in the German coalition around an investment by a Chinese container or shipping company that wanted to buy almost half of a new container terminal in Hamburg. And several departments said no, they shouldn't do it because this is infrastructure. And then Scholz himself pushed it through, but the Chinese were only allowed to, I think, buy 24%, and only financial engagement. So they have nothing to say about the infrastructure. But I think probably if you look at Germany and if you look beyond Germany, like Romania, Serbia, a lot of countries, Hungary, there's so much Chinese infrastructure already in place that it's impossible to
Africa has got a new empire, hasn't it? And it is called China, with the amount of investment that it's putting into various different countries. What about aid, though? Does Germany give China any aid?
I don't know that, and I must say I'm really surprised to read that number, £69 million. I would like to know what it went for. So there is no specifics, are there?
Neale, on this question of aid, this is a 2019 figure. I don't know if it's still happening, but it does seem extraordinary on the face of it. But it was the same argument with India, where money was being sent to India to relieve rural poverty, and people said, yes, but they're sending rockets into space, so why should we be doing that? I suspect it's a similar argument here.
Yeah, it is similar. I mean, there's a difficult balance between the ethical consideration, whether it's because of the democratic movement that's beginning to rise in China, or the alleged suppression of the Uyghurs, and that ethical context versus the economy, and the Chinese GDP accounts for a fifth of the world's economic performance. So it's not it's certainly a small economy, and it does raise questions about, well, what is that aid for? Where is it going? Is it going to support communities that maybe aren't getting the type of support we'd like to see them get from their own government, or is it being siphoned away, as some people have ongoing concerns about the true destination of aid. So it certainly, I think, in any situation like this, the governance arrangements are really important.
If there were an independent Scotland, I mean, perish the thought, but if there were...
with the words...
Okay, all right, well, let's say there's an independent Scotland in 2025. How would Scottish government policy towards China be different from the current UK government policy?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, that would be a decision for the government of the day and how they chose to engage with the world. But certainly, as a responsible member of the international community, all things would have to be taken into consideration. It's impossible to give you a concrete answer to a hypothetical question.
Polly?
Well, we don't know what this money's for. Quite often bits of the aid budget go to unlikely countries, but for something very specific. I mean, for all we know, this isn't a huge amount of money, given our aid budget. 68 million is not vast. It may be for something, for instance, to do with climate change alleviation or something like that, one might hope.
Mm-hmm.
But
yes.
even
if it was, I mean, surely China should be paying for that, given that it is now an economic superpower.
Well, it might be doing something that they weren't going to do otherwise. Who knows? We don't know is the answer. But I do think that the size and heft of China is very alarming, as you say, right across the world, Africa, everywhere. I think George Osborne and David Cameron were wrong to lay out the red carpet to the extent they did, golden era, all of that, and to give them the keys to our new nuclear power at Hinkley Point, and to give them the potential, who knows what kind of chips they might be putting into, what kinds of infrastructure that they're building for us. I think it's not safe, and we now seem to be pulling back a bit and thinking security matters and we shouldn't be totally in hock to them. But of course we are. Almost everything we have is made in China, whether it's shoes or mobile phones. Are we willing to pay a whole lot more to have it made at home? I mean, there is quite a movement to say, let's not be so global, let's try and manufacture more here. I don't know how realistic that is, because it would be vastly more expensive to buy almost everything. But I think caution and also some humility, recognising we are a very weak player. We were a stronger player as part of Europe. We're a very weak player on our own. At the bottom of the
largest economy in the world. That doesn't seem to me to be a weak player.
We are at the bottom of the G20 at the moment for growth. We're down on our uppers. So
sixth largest economy, Polly. I mean, that is not a weak
It depends a bit what you look at and what you count. There are a lot of things that say actually we're 23rd, but never mind.
Really?
We are not as strong as we like. We posture a lot. We strut on the world stage as if we were still an empire, and it's a bit embarrassing. I think it's very important we stay in with what NATO wants us to do. We don't start sending our, aircraft carriers off to the South China Sea in order to kind of make a mark ourselves. We stay in closely with America, and America, want us to be tougher with China. It's a very difficult path to navigate, and we shouldn't delude ourselves.
Edward.
well, we may or may not be 6th, 7th, 23rd or whatever, but we surely have the potential to have quite a lot of soft power in terms of our foreign policy. With their deplorable human rights record and with their penetration of our institutions here, what they're doing in Africa and all over the world, I think Rishi Sunak's quite right for a reset. And I think that it was based on optimism, the Osborne-Cameron approach. How do we change things? Well, clearly we ought to be able to account for 68.4 million. On the other hand, we need some influence in China, and I dare say, although this may be a touch cynical, having aid does at least allow us to have some access to various institutions to understand what's going on in China. So I think I'd be a bit wary, and I was interested Neale didn't immediately depart from the idea that we should be giving aid, albeit not much.
Well, I mean, the point I would make in response to your comments is that the rhetoric is not necessarily helpful. If you want to exert soft power, then you have to be careful about the words that you choose to use about any state that you're engaging with. And I don't think it's particularly helpful to use enemy in any context, particularly when we have a hot war in Europe. The last thing we want is a Cold War or a freezing of relationships with China when their influence in many different aspects to that particular conflict is potentially very important.
We shouldn't be so timorous that we don't call out
absolutely
human
not.
rights outrages.
Oh, no, well, and the Parliament has not been. I think everyone's spoken as one about particularly the Uyghurs.
OK, we'll come to more of your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 973. If you'd like to ask our panel a question, you can text 84850, or if you want to send it via Alexa, just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and then just say your question, and we will put it to our panel. It's 18 minutes past 8.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
21 minutes past 8 on LBC. 0345 6060 973. That's the number to call if you want to put a question to Edward Folkes, who is chair of IPSO. Now, what are the challenges of chairing IPSO?
The challenges are trying to make sure that you're accessible to complainants and that they understand the process and that you make sure that they have a fair response to their complaints. And also ensuring that the newspapers have a fair hearing. It's a boring balance. You're probably going to displease everybody, but you hope at least you'll have the reputation as being an honest broker, and there'll be grudging acceptance that what you do is necessary and helpful and encourages the press to be accurate and to comply with the editor's code, which is our Bible.
And are they all members of IPSO?
No. There are some who've chosen not to be, like The Guardian, the Financial Times and the Evening Standard, but I think it's 97% by way of circulation. We regulate all those newspapers.
So it's been set up by the newspaper industry. Its press code has been written by Paul Dacre. May yet make it to the House of Lords. He wrote it. He wrote the press.
He was one of the contributors. The editor's code is revised on a regular basis. There is a committee on which Paul Dacre does not sit, anybody can make suggestions to what should be in the code, whether it should be changed. It is revised from time to time.
The code is wonderful, nothing wrong with it. It's like reading the Bible, but it's not exactly what you get when you read the British newspaper.
So you're totally unregulated then, are you?
We
think
that it's worse to be regulated together by a group of, some of the Britain's worst newspapers. We have abominable newspapers.
But we're not. The newspapers don't regulate them. We regulate them. And
you own it. They own it. They set it up. They owned it. It's not an official body. It's been set up by the newspaper industry, but not by those of us who regard ourselves a bit more respectable, such as the Financial Times and the Guardian.
I'm not casting any aspersions about the respectability of either newspaper, but on the other hand, an independent regulator who, and where none of us part of any newspaper, is there to try and be a broker between the two. If you regulate yourself, there is a lack of independence about the process, is there not?
Well, if it had been followed through the Lord Leveson, we really want to go into this detail.
Well, I was just
if we'd followed through Lord Leveson, we would have ended up with a genuine independent, not something set up and paid for by the.
Weren't you? You supported that. What's the difference?
Supported
Press Complaints Commission, the one that was.
No, I never did. No, we are against that too, because it's all was set up by the newspaper industry itself. And if you want to have the likes of, Murdoch and the Barclay brothers and the rest of them actually running a so-called regulator,
well, they don't. It's independent.
I mean,
it's independent.
Well, so they say, but that's who sets
I
it up.
don't.
That's who
we
put the
are
money
acting
in
an independent way. If you look at the people who actually decide the cases, we had a meeting this morning. They are not inclined to take any particular view, and our decisions are all published. You can examine them and decide whether or not they show any partiality one way or another. We disappoint the newspapers very often. I've been criticised as being over tough as a regulator.
Well, it's a shame, isn't it, that you didn't follow Lord Leveson's excellent recommendations, and then we would have a genuinely proper, independent and,
that's all
regulator.
We've got time for on the media show this week. Stefanie Bolzen is here from Die Welt. Do we want to go into the way German newspapers are regulated? I don't think we do we?
No, certainly not. But I must say it's a very interesting topic in this country, and I've written quite a lot about it because from the outside it's fascinating what went on with the Leveson inquiry and everything that's caused it, and it's sometimes astonishing.
And as for the Scottish press, Neale, where do we start?
Well, I would ask, what Scottish press? No, I mean, I've been at the sharp end of, media stories that have either been wholly untrue or distorted, and it's very unpleasant. But what you've got to remember is that real people are affected by some of these stories. And I'm a pretty resilient character, so I can put up with quite a lot. But it is quite distressing when people make accusations that are, fabricated, and you, certainly as a public figure, don't feel that you can defend yourself because actually it will just that Streisand effect, which draws more attention and makes it a lot worse.
Well, I actually took the Daily Mail to the Press Complaints Commission once when they called me overtly gay. I mean, as if.
We have to remember what started Leveson was the shocking behaviour of hacking.
Yes.
It was so disgusting, and now somehow Murdoch and all the rest have managed to sweep it away and said, we've got this wonderful new clean system which we've set up called IPSO. And I'm sorry, but the people who did the hacking are the people who have set up a regulator. And decent though the individuals may be, you cannot call that an independent system.
So you're decent but not independent?
Apparently not. I thought I was independent, and we purport, and we are independent.
Okay, right, we have a question sort of that's vaguely related to this from Chantal in Eastbourne. With the government seemingly watering down its online harms bill so the tech giants don't really have to take any action, is it really possible to police the internet? Well, let's start with you, Edward.
I think it's incredibly difficult, and this piece of legislation, which has now been revised, is going to be less than perfect. But it must be remembered, in defence of the government, any government in fact, that there is nothing to cut and paste from any other jurisdiction. It is a very, very considerable achievement to get anything off the ground. I suspect we'll be looking again at it in a couple of years, but I think getting something on the statute book which will go in the right direction is the right call.
But isn't that the biggest weakness, that we are the only jurisdiction doing this? Surely if internet platforms don't want to comply with the law in this country, they just set up in another country.
Yeah, you could carry that argument so far, in which case, let's not do anything. But the answer is, I hope that we'll actually be setting an example, if that doesn't sound too sort of jolly in public school. But I mean, we are producing legislation which will make a significant contribution. It's raised awareness. The internet companies are going to have a duty to protect children, which is the most important thing. Mm-hmm. And I think we should, and I hope parliamentarians work towards making the bill as good as it can be.
Neale?
Yeah, I mean, well, my background's in the NHS, and something that I've always been responsible for, and indeed every member of staff in the NHS is responsible for, is the safeguarding of children and vulnerable adults. And it's a matter that's taken extremely seriously, and I would hope that the interests on the internet, particularly the corporate giants, take the matter seriously and are seen to be proactive. We know that that's not been the case, and that very real harm has come to some young people. And I have I've effectively fell out with the SNP over the very issue of safeguarding when it came to their gender recognition review bill, because I didn't think that there were sufficient safeguards within that. And that is, that's backed up by the experience of people like Joanna Cherry, who suffered tremendous abuse on the back of her concerns that I share. And the Special Rapporteur from the UN has reinforced our position that there needs to be protections for violence against women and girls, but that extends into the online world, and we must take safeguarding seriously. As a parent, I've had situations where my young children have been on a game app on their phones, and they've been targeted by people pretending to be kids. And, we got to the police tonight, did everything, and the kids were great. But, it's a very real and scary place. And parents forget that when their child's on a game, that there's a chat facility within that, and you don't know who that
But
person
do
is.
you side with Nadine Dorries here, which I know you wouldn't normally do, but I mean, her version of this bill, I think, was much more stringent and tough than the revised bill that's now going to go through Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for civil liberties of consenting adults to choose to engage in whatever they want to do. But when platforms use algorithms that lead vulnerable young people down avenues to decisions that they maybe wouldn't make, whether that's self-harming or any other such disturbing content, then I think that there needs to be a responsible approach, and that's...
Okay, but is that Nadine Dorries' or Michelle Donlan's?
Well, I think it's somewhere in between. I mean, there's a responsibility for parents to educate young people, and we've done that in our home. We've had
parents often aren't up to date with all the technological developments.
And that is a very real problem. And so there is a fundamental responsibility with the platforms to ensure that their policies.
Okay, we'll come to Polly and Stefanie after the news. It's 8:30 on LBC. Let's get the news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
It's thought more than 20 people died because of an error at a COVID testing lab in the Midlands last year, which produced false negative results. And investigations found it resulted in an extra 55,000 infections. A man has been arrested in connection with the deaths of at least 27 people who drowned in the Channel last year. The 32-year-old detained in Cheltenham earlier will face extradition proceedings tomorrow. And it looks like Wales could be heading out of the World Cup after England scored 2 goals in just a few minutes apart, followed by a third in the last few minutes. The Netherlands won 2-0 against host Qatar to finish top of their group, with Senegal following them into the knockout rounds after a 2-1 victory over Ecuador. LBC weather, fog and low cloud overnight with a low of 1. Brighter tomorrow with some showers in the northwest, highs of 11 degrees.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
It's 8:35 on LBC. We have Polly Toynbee, Neale, Hanvey, Stefanie Bolzen and Edward Fawkes with us. Folks, sorry, I keep mispronouncing your name. I do apologise. 0345 6060 973. If you'd like to put a question to them. Before we go to Polly and Stefanie to answer the last question, Neale, the Alba party, it was set up before the last Scottish parliamentary elections. Don't think you won any seats, did you?
No, we didn't.
And are you going to stand in all of the seats in the next general election?
Well, our position on that will be crystallised on the 10th of December. We're holding a special assembly to consider the constitutional future.
Did you say Alex Salmond is the leader of the party?
He is, yes.
South of the border who may not know.
So what we, our position at the moment is that we believe that Scotland should pursue the next general election, whether that be a Scottish election or a Westminster election, as Scotland United, with representatives from all of the independent supporting parties, plus representatives from Civic Scotland, broadcasting, people who have good standing, and our independent voices from the political parties, because the movement, certainly in 2014, was about putting Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. It wasn't about putting the future of Scotland in the hands of the Supreme Court or Westminster, or indeed any specific political party or party leader. So I think we need to reflect that. But that's a decision, it's not a cop-out for me, because
you're basically going to lose your job in 2 years' time, aren't you?
Well, I mean, that's not a great concern to me, because the whole point of being elected to come here was to do exactly that, to put myself out of a job.
Yeah, but not quite in these circumstances.
Well, not in these circumstances, but, whether we succeed or don't at the next election and how that election is fought is yet to be determined. The movement has a bit of reflecting to do. But
how many SNP Westminster MPs joined the Alba party?
There was just myself and Kenny McCaskill.
And do your former SNP colleagues shun you? Do they send you to Coventry, or do you still have cordial
With the
relations?
exception of a few, yes, absolutely.
Name them.
Well, it'd be easier to name the people who don't shun me.
Okay, right. Let's go back to our question, which was about the online harms bill. This is from Chantal in Eastbourne. With the government seemingly watering down the online harms bill, so the tech giants don't really have to take any action, is it really possible to police the internet, Polly?
Very difficult to police the internet, but we should do everything we can. We should try as hard as we can. And it's very sad to see the government watering down the bill yet again. I mean, this government, under this Prime Minister, is just blown every which way by any pressure from any bit of his party. And there's a kind of libertarian wing who say, oh, no, this is a terrible curtailment of free speech. Well, I don't think it is free speech to stop people being pushed, with suicide sites and anorexia sites and self-harm sites. I mean, it's a good thing that at least children will be protected from that. But actually, I don't think that stuff should be out there. I mean, what's interesting about this, it says things that are harmful but not illegal, and you stop and think, well, actually, why isn't it illegal? Maybe more of this stuff should be illegal anyway. It's a bit of a peculiar grey area. But I think the great pressure from the public, what most people seem to want from all the polling, is more control and less disgusting stuff and less damaging stuff. So the government should do everything it can, and, to hell with a handful of nutty libertarians of the kind of, Trussite type.
Stefanie.
I'm raising 3 girls in the age between 9 and 20. I mean, the older ones are now, luckily, I think, old enough. But you worry a lot. And this law obviously comes because of the horrible, sad case of Molly Russell. Is that correct? And, of course, you wonder when the door closes and they're on their phone, what are they actually doing? So I agree, while you can't police the internet, but in any case, it raises awareness. It makes also parents more aware of what is out there, because we don't really know, whether it's because we don't look at these sites. Obviously, we don't have the time to do this, actually. But you should, it's education. You need to educate your children. You have to be aware of it. And in Germany in 2017, actually, they did adopt a law, and this is a wonderful German begriff for you, which is the Netzwerkdurchsuchungsgesetz.
Oh, I've got it.
Netzwerk, can you say?
Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz.
Durchsuchungsgesetz. Yeah.
No, it says Setzung here. I think you'll find I'm right.
So that means you are allowed to police the net. And it fails in many aspects, but lately a former MP of the Greens, who was terribly harassed on the internet, she won court cases against people who had harassed her. They were found, they were convicted. And so you can see that there is certain...
But not against the platforms, against the individual offenders.
Individuals, but
what we want to have is some legislation, some kickback against platforms that allow it.
Well, they had said they're going to create a criminal offence out of encouraging self-harm. I mean, that's what they announced. I'm not quite sure which individuals are going to be responsible, whether it's going to be who's responsible for the publication or moderating of the platform. But, I mean, that's an interesting development.
But there are websites, I think, and you see, even as I say this, I'm wondering whether I should even say it, but there are websites, apparently, that demonstrate how to harm yourself. How can they possibly be legal? And if they are legal, why doesn't... Surely
I think
that's
they'd be illegal by this new provision. That's what I understand.
Well, I hope that's right, because it's unbelievable that these sites can exist.
Yeah, I agree.
I recently saw guidance for the LGBT community in London, provided by one of the large NHS trusts, which included advice about how to self-harm in a group as part of a fetish. Now, that's been put out by the NHS amongst a range of other issues that were, I felt, completely unacceptable, how to obtain sex by deception, various other things. And really, if we are allowing our institutions to put that kind of message out and have a relaxed view about safeguarding in that fundamental way, then, it's hard to make the argument that online platforms should be more responsible than our own NHS. Now, that's probably a very extreme example, but it's a
Sounds
fact
very weird.
nonetheless.
What bit of the NHS put this out?
Well, I don't want to name them on the show.
Go on, name
Why
one.
not?
Go on.
Yeah.
If it's
Who
a
was
publicly
it?
available document.
It was a document that came through a meeting with the Lords, and it was from King's College.
Really?
Yeah.
Polly says there's a column coming on.
Yeah, I'll share it with you.
Okay, thank you. Send it to me.
Yeah, no, I've only got it in hard copy, but it's pretty shocking.
The problem is that somebody somewhere has to make a judgment on what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, and all five of us on this panel would have a different place of drawing the barrier, wouldn't we? That's the problem. How do you define that sort of thing in law? I wouldn't want to do it.
The world is full of grey areas, but you don't just give up. You just have to do the best you can with grey areas.
Yeah.
Right, we will go to a slightly early break before we come on to your next question. It's 8:44.
LBC Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
I'll answer that, but
It's 8:47 on LBC. Polly Toynbee, Neale Hanvey from the Alba Party is here, Stefanie Bolzen from Welt, and Edward Vokes, chair of the Independent Press Standards Organisation. They're here to take your questions. Well, let's go to a text question from Bethany in Liverpool. Should we be disappointed that the number of religious people in this country is falling so quickly? Polly Toynbee has been gagging to answer this question, haven't you, Polly?
Well, I am Vice President, was President of Humanists UK. We are atheists. We are very keen for us not to be a religious country.
Isn't that a sort of religion in itself, atheism?
Of course not. People would say that. Of course not. That's ridiculous. The absence of religion isn't religion.
Yes, but how can you be sure that there isn't a God just as someone of faith believes that there is?
That's not really our point. Our point is to say anybody can believe what they like. We are great defenders of people's rights to hold religious views. It's a question of stopping those with religious views imposing them on the rest of us. For instance, the right to die is the last great issue still to be fought. It is mostly the religious lobbies in the Lords and in the Commons who have prevented it happening, despite the fact that for decades now, 80% of people who've seen relatives die in agony actually think we should have a right to die at a time of our own choosing when we're terminally ill. That's a very important issue for a lot of people, and it's prevented by very large, 26 bishops in the House of Lords, plus lots of leaders of all sorts of other faiths to try and balance it up. We are a very theocratic country. What are we doing with a third of our state schools are run by religious organisations, which is astounding. We have been one of the most secular countries for a long time.
I went to the Church of England primary school, but it wasn't somewhere that sort of ran religion down your throat.
What were you? I mean, perhaps you may be a member of the Church of England.
No, I'm not. Well, I was confirmed.
Perhaps your parents were.
Yeah, and I was christened into the Church of England. I was confirmed into the Church of England, but I'm an agnostic. I don't say I'm an atheist for the reason I gave earlier.
That's, a small number of parents may want to send their children to religious schools, but the point is, the reason why a third of our schools are religious is because an awful lot of them end up being subtly selective, partly because they were set up in better areas, and parents push to get them in there, often actually get on their knees for a couple of years to get the vicar to sign the form so that they can get their kid in, and then they're never seen again. Young parents you see in church, older ones have all vanished, because by the time they've got into school then they can hop it, because we are not a religious country, and we shouldn't have so much of our important education run by the religious. It's peculiar.
Edward.
Well, there are a lot of bishops in the House of Lords, it's true. I actually was the minister when a private member's bill was going through on assisted dying, and I thought I knew what I thought about it, but in fact the government was always neutral on this issue, and it's up to, in fact, the Commons to decide whether or not to initiate legislation. But it's a very difficult area. It's not quite fair, Polly, to say that it's only bishops and the religious who disagree with the assisted dying point. There are a lot of palliative care experts and others who...
They're mostly religious. The palliative care lobby, and they're wonderful people who do fantastic work, but the people drawn into it and the sort of doctors who work for it, Neale, who's one of its great representatives, are nearly all themselves of the faith or a faith, so that it's that's not really the answer.
But you're saying that as if that disqualifies them from a view.
No, it doesn't, but it means that again the religious are having a huge impact on the great majority who are not.
Isn't there a danger that, we can be dismissing religion as something just simply because you personally don't share the views of those who have a religious faith, and dismissing them as somehow intellectually inferior, not worthy of opinions, not worthy of being...
Right, I'm not going to have this as a debate between the two of you. We've done that once before, and look where it ended. Stefanie.
It's a very interesting debate, I must say. Maybe we continue it after the show. The question was, should we be disappointed, yeah?
Yeah.
I don't think we should be disappointed. Saying that, though, I was sometimes surprised of the intolerance that I encountered, because I'm a Rhinish Catholic. And when I moved to London, I started going to church, because when you're a foreigner in a foreign country, you're looking for community. And church is a nice community to go to. And including my husband, socialist husband, he was very intolerant with me, saying, this is a bunch of strange people you are going to meet every Sunday. And I sometimes encounter here a certain intolerance, and more than in Germany, about if you want to go to church. It doesn't mean you are crazy or you are corrupted or something. It's just my culture. I see it more as a cultural thing, and it's a nice community, and it's somewhere where you can feel at home. So I think it's a bit sad that gets lost. Yeah.
And it is, I think, possibly more so in Germany, and it certainly was. Okay, I haven't lived there for 40 years, but certainly when I lived there, that the church, whether it was Protestant or Catholic, was absolutely integral in the local community, and that was where a lot of the community just naturally met, even if they weren't particularly religious. And I mean, I'm not religious, but I remember thinking that if I did live in Germany full time, I probably would gravitate to, it was actually the Catholic church that I used to go to, because my original pen friend used to go there sort of every Wednesday evening, so I would go with him, and it was great. And I think that get them young. That's what religions need to do, and they're clearly not doing it in this country, are they, Neale?
Well, I mean, my view is I've got quite a curious relationship with religion. I was born into a Presbyterian family in the north of Ireland, and that has with all of those connotations. And then when we moved to Scotland, my two best friends were Catholic boys, and I went to chapel for most of my adolescence, and it was certainly more fun, great social community. But also growing up gay in quite a hostile environment in Scotland in those days, and that was emphasised by religious groups. It really helped me decide that I didn't have a place in there. But the curious thing is that much of the moral teachings from that have remained present in my life and important to me in my career in the NHS. And now I think what we need to do is to make sure that there is a respectful environment for everyone to practice their faith or not, as the case may be. And there's probably a need to perhaps borrow Rishi Sunak's phrase, reset our position as a country.
Otto English, the historian, is listening. He's tweeted, fun fact, the UK is one of just 3 nations on earth to have religious clerics in their legislatures. The other 2 are, anyone guess?
Iran.
Correct.
I could only think of Iran.
And the Vatican.
Oh.
Of course.
Which I suppose shouldn't be too surprising. Right, let's go to a
We are a
final question
theocracy.
from Bill in Farnborough. Our courts, our nation's government and the British people all agree Scotland shouldn't get another referendum on independence so soon after the last one. Why won't independence campaigners accept reality now, Neale?
Well, because it's not reality. Democracy is not a single event. Democracy is a continuing state, and that is enshrined in international law. Now, from 1941, the Atlantic Charter was signed by Roosevelt and Churchill. That was the genesis of where and how we understand the expression of self-determination, and that has been refined and changed over the years. Now, the fundamental problem with the Supreme Court's ruling was that they cited only partial elements of the Quebec case and also, I would say, of the Kosovo case, and they asserted...
Are you seriously questioning the Supreme Court's decision on the law?
Oh, yes, and I'll do it further tomorrow after trail my debate tomorrow afternoon at 4:00 in Westminster Hall on Parliament TV
Because
Live.
Nicola Sturgeon hasn't done that, has
No.
she?
Well, I don't speak for Nicola Sturgeon.
No, I know you
Nicola
don't.
Sturgeon accepted the decision.
I think it's interesting that you're not accepting the decision.
I'm not... hang on a second. I'm not accepting that they've made that decision within the context of the UK state apparatus. That may well be correct within the UK state apparatus, but that's not necessarily the only forum in which that question can be considered. So the point I'm making is that they cited partial evidence and that this is a much more complicated question than, well, Scotland's not a colony, so therefore they don't get have an inherent right to self-determination. That's not what international law says.
Edward.
Well, I think the Supreme Court were construing an Act of Parliament as a matter of law. They weren't expressing a particular view.
Yeah.
They construed it in the light of normal canons of construction. They took into account international law, and they came plainly to the conclusion that this was not a matter for the devolved nation Scotland, notwithstanding their wish. It was a reserved matter. It was pretty straightforward. Whether you agree with the sentiment behind it is a different matter, but as a matter of law, I think it's pretty unarguable.
Well, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you in that context. What I'm saying is that international law has moved on from the time when a colony had to be some distant territory to assert its status as a colony, and it's much more nuanced now, particularly since the fall of the USSR in the 90s. And the legislation that the USSR actually signed up to, which allowed different parts of predecessor states to assert self-determination.
We are rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to ask you both for some brief answers on this one. You may be relieved or not.
Very briefly, of course, independence campaigners should continue campaigning. I mean, this is part of democracy and freedom of expression. I've been a lot to Scotland, and I do understand why a part of the population feels that things are imposed on them, especially Brexit. Absolutely. 2/3 of the Scots didn't want Brexit. And the younger the people are you talk to, the more keenly they want independence. Whether that's the right way for Scotland, I'm not sure. I think there should be a more federal system of the United Kingdom as such. But I mean, coming from a federal country, that's easy to say because that's a massive constitutional project.
Which actually, during COVID, we did see a sort of federal organisation, didn't we, Polly?
I desperately want the Scots not to go. I shall be very sad if they go. But the point is, at some point or another, we're going to have to give them another referendum, and I don't know what that tipping point is, but what's the point of going on fighting against a referendum? I mean, we can't say no indefinitely. Maybe it'll be for the next government. I mean, if I were Labour, if Labour winning a big majority next time, I'd give them about 2 months and go for it right away on the grounds that once you've got a Labour government in London, you might be less. A lot of the wavering voters in Scotland might be less likely to vote for independence.
Our final fun text question. I want one-word answers from each of you. Craig in Wrexham. Driving examiners have become the latest group to announce they're going on strike over pay this winter. So, panel, how many times did you have to take your driving test before you passed? Polly?
Twice.
Neale?
Once.
Edward?
Twice.
Straight away.
Straight away, as did I. Very boring answers there, I'm afraid. I think I was hoping that one of you would say 5 or something. Thank you very much to Polly Toynbee, Neale Hanvey, Stefanie Bolzen and Lord Edward Folkes. Coming up in a moment, we're going to turn our attention to one of the questions that was answered during Cross Question. For the first time, fewer than half of people in England and Wales describe themselves as Christian. Does that matter? And I also want to ask you, if you've fallen out of love with your religion, why did it happen? And what's happened since then? And I'm not just talking about the Christian, whether you're Catholic, Protestant, Jew, Muslim. It happens in all religions. Why have you